This hearing will come to order. This hearing is fully virtual, and we're going to go over our housekeeping matters again. For today's meeting, the chair or the staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purpose of eliminating background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If you notice that you have not unmuted yourself, please do so when you're called upon for a question. If I notice that you haven't unmuted yourself, I would ask if you need the staff to help you. Please indicate it by nodding, and the staff will unmute your microphone. All members and witnesses, the 5-minute clock is up on the corner. It should be displayed, and we will be using the 5-minute clock for questions. If there's a technical issue, I will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time, so you won't lose any time due to a technical issue. You'll notice this clock on the screen, how much time's remaining. At 1 minute, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time has almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and I will begin recognizing the next member. In terms of speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair, the ranking member, and then members at the time the hearing was called to order. They will be recognized in order of seniority. And finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything that they wish to submit in writing to any of our hearings or markups, and that email address has been provided to your staff. So the Subcommittee on Defense is now in order, and this morning the committee will receive testimony on the posture of the National Guard and the reserve components for the federal fiscal year 2022 budget. It'll be a 2-panel hearing. Panel 1 recognizes the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Panel 2 will recognize the reserve component chiefs, the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force reserves. And I encourage all members to participate in both panels. We have 5 witnesses across the 2 panels testifying, so I'm going to be brief, very brief in my opening remarks. The subcommittee provides funding for the National Guard and Reserve, personnel cost, operation and maintenance, and equipment funding, including the National Guard, Reserve, and Equipment account. And that is an appropriation which is not included in the President's budget and will probably be referred to the rest of this hearing as NAGRIA. Funding is also provided for activities such as counter-drug operations, Humvee modernization, helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, and more. And I'm particularly interested in hearing how that funding supports your missions and what capability gaps exist today. I'd also like to receive your input on the current pace of operations. Our National Guard forces are called upon to support a variety of missions, including humanitarian missions and civil unrest. And many of us have had the National Guard in our communities helping with civil unrest. They support the southwest border, overseas operations, and of course, the latest, the support of our capital security. I want you to know that each member of this committee and all members of Congress are eternally grateful for their tireless efforts from the National Guard. I am interested to hear about how the seemingly endless calls to duty are reflecting our troop morale, readiness, and retention efforts. It's also vitally important that you are providing a high level of quality care for our soldiers. Incidents of sexual assault, harassment, and extremism are all too common among the ranks. Your leadership in addressing these disturbing acts has never been more important, and I'd like to know exactly what you're doing to reverse these harmful and dangerous trends. Now, with that, I'd like to recognize our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Calvert from California, for his opening remarks. Mr. Calvert.
Thank you, Chair McCollum. I would like to welcome General Huskisson to this subcommittee for the first time. You had a lot on your plate in the first 8 months on your job. So I appreciate you're taking the time to meet with us today. Over the past year, our nation's become even more reliant on your nearly 450,000 citizen airmen and soldiers. From responding to COVID-19 pandemic and civil unrest to continuing operations abroad, I would like to thank all the Guardsmen for their ongoing and steadfast commitment to our nation. I struggle to think of another time in American history that we've asked the Guard to do the range of missions and at the tempo in which they've been operating over the past year. And I share the chair's concern about the morale and retention of our Guard. As we continue to hopefully move past the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic and look to the light at the end of the tunnel, it's important that we hear from our witnesses today about the current and future requirements of our Guard and Reserve components. This includes evaluating readiness, modernization shortfalls, understanding where the support of the National Guard is most needed, and preparing for the conflict in the era of great power competition, particularly in the cyber and space domain. It's critical that we ensure that the Guard and Reserve components are adequately trained, equipped, and connected with our active duty partners to meet our national security objectives. As a representative from a border state, I look forward to hearing about the Guard's role in responding to the ongoing crisis at our southern border. I was out there yesterday, and it is a challenge, I give you that. And so I look forward to hearing from you about that. I want to conclude by thanking you for your service. I look forward to your testimony, and with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert. It appears that the full committee chair and ranking member are not joining us at this hearing, so I'll move to witnesses unless one of them joins us later. We will, of course, allow them opening.
Point of clarification, Madam Chair. I was going to do an opening statement for the second panel. Are we going to have time for that, or are you doing that all in one time?
Whatever you, I was just giving one, but if you want to give it now, feel free to do so. Mr. Calvert, if you'd like to do it in front of the second panel, I'm fine with that too.
Either way, you're the chair. I'll do whatever you like. I'll just wait till the second panel. Perfect.
All right. So I'd now like to recognize our witness for the first panel, and that is General Daniel Hoekstra, of the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Welcome. And as Mr. Calvert pointed out, this is your very first time testifying in front of the subcommittee, and we are so pleased to have you here. General, your full written statement will be placed in the record, and members do have copies available at their offices. So I'd like to give you as much time as possible for you to interact with members so they can ask questions. So I encourage you to summarize your statement to be complete but succinct also in responding to our questions. So General, we look forward to your opening statement. Please proceed.
Chairwoman McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, and members of the subcommittee, it's an honor to join you virtually today on behalf of the soldiers and airmen of your National Guard. For nearly 385 years, the National Guard has taken on our nation's greatest challenges. As a primary combat reserve of the Army and the Air Force, we are man-trained and equipped to fight our nation's wars. In times of emergency, our people training and equipment help us respond to our communities. This is our job, and we're proud to do it. In 2020, however, our motto of always ready, always there was put to the test. Last June, more National Guard troops were mobilized than at any time since World War II. Nearly 120,000 soldiers and airmen were deployed, supporting the warfight overseas or involved in domestic operations here at home. This included responding to the COVID-19 pandemic in a wide variety of roles, responding to civil unrest in our cities, and responding to historic wildfires and hurricanes across the country. We also continued our military training in 2020, and despite the COVID environment, the National Guard met every overseas deployment requirement. And it was the Minnesota National Guard's 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team who completed the first National Training Center rotation in a COVID environment in July of last year. In January, in response to the attack on the Capitol, we mobilized and deployed over 26,000 National Guardsmen to Washington, D.C. in less than 2 weeks. Using organic National Guard air support and logistics, soldiers and airmen from every state and territory arrived to help secure our 59th presidential inauguration. While the past year has provided countless examples of the National Guard's extraordinary work, today I'd like to highlight just a single weekend, Labor Day of 2020. That weekend, while many Americans were on holiday, more than 64,000 National Guardsmen were on duty around the world. Roughly 20,000 of these soldiers and airmen were deployed across 34 nations in support of our combatant commanders. More than 18,000 were helping their communities fight COVID-19, from manning testing sites to cleaning long-term care facilities to working in food banks so our fellow Americans wouldn't go hungry. More than 1,500 were protecting the rights of peaceful protesters and safeguarding communities against violence in Georgia, Texas, Kentucky, and Wisconsin. More than 3,500 were helping their communities recover from Hurricane Laura in Texas and Louisiana. In Alaska, a team of Guardian Angel airmen rescued 2 hikers, one who fell more than 100 feet off a cliff and was seriously injured. For their actions, they were awarded the Wilderness Rescue of the Year by the American Red Cross of Alaska. And out west, specially modified C-130s from the California and Nevada Air National Guard teamed up with National Guard MQ-9 unmanned aerial systems and helicopters from multiple states to fight record wildfires. This included the dramatic rescue of 240 people trapped by wildfires in the Sierra National Forest by the California National Guard's 40th Combat Aviation Brigade. This daring night rescue in heavy smoke was possible because our crews had modernized helicopters and the latest generation night vision goggles. For their heroism and extraordinary achievement, those air crews were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. This one weekend tells the National Guard story. Our country and our communities needed us, so the men and women of the National Guard left their civilian jobs, their families, and proudly served as soldiers and airmen. Their selfless service is both important and inspiring, and is reflected in our recruiting and retention. Today's National Guard is an operational force, and we are full partners with the Army and Air Force in our nation's defense. This would not have been possible without your investments over the last 20 years that transformed the National Guard from a strategic reserve to today's operational force. I'm grateful for the committee's support in helping us provide our soldiers and airmen with the facilities, equipment, and training resources they need to be interoperable on the battlefield and responsive in our communities. Combined with our commitment to partnerships at every level, from local first responders to FEMA to our 82 international state partnerships, we are posturing for the future. However, there are still places we fall short. Our equipment must be deployable, sustainable, and interoperable. Our facilities must be repaired or replaced if they're no longer functional. And our level of full-time support must increase so we can become more efficient and effective. There are also distractions our soldiers and airmen face every day. If they don't have health care, what happens if they get sick or injured when they come off orders? If they're doing the same job as their active or reserve counterparts, why are they treated differently? And if they've invested their career in the space mission, will there still be a home for them in a Space National Guard? Every day our team is working to address these issues, and there are solutions, and I'm committed to working with the Army, the Air Force, and you to find them. Among my most pressing concerns are premium-free health care for every Guardsman who serves in uniform, the establishment of a Space National Guard, and elevating the rank of 6 of our general officers commensurate to the level of responsibility and authority they are given. These are not only strategically important issues, they're just the right thing to do. The National Guard is about 20% of our joint force, and anything that impacts our readiness reduces our nation's ability to deter and makes the total joint force less competitive, less capable, and less lethal. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. So General, I'm going to pick up on healthcare coverage. You spoke to the staff a little bit after our meeting, and you had mentioned 600,000 Guard personnel do not have health insurance. and that the lack of coverage and copays for those with coverage have made it difficult to ensure that everyone has access. And at that time, you were focusing primarily on mental health. I would like to learn more, and we're going to have a panel that addresses on healthcare, on health services. So I think some of the things that we need to understand is a breakdown that the staff will be asking you, so you don't have to provide it today, by state, who lacks health insurance, whether or not it's available for folks and they've chosen not to sign up for it. I know in Minnesota, between MNsure and some of the things through the Affordable Care Act, we have very high insurance rates and great premiums for the coverage in Minnesota. So I want to see how this breaks down by state, because the states aren't offering policies that are affordable. That can become a different issue that we'll need to address. But I would like to know how you, especially when it comes to mental health that you mentioned, not having soldiers, airmen, Marines, and Guardians without healthcare coverage, how you see this full impact on here. I also need to understand when we do our health panel, how TRICARE fits into this. Are people refusing to take TRICARE in some cases? Is it unavailable in some locations? So I want to ferret out the health insurance issue a little more with you. So the staff will be following up with questions. So I look forward to working with you to resolve that. So I'm going to go to a question that I would like you to answer a little more today. And that is, in January, as you know, Secretary Austin ordered a department-wide stand-down to address extremism. And earlier this month, he established a countering extremism working groups to examine how the services would implement the immediate and long-range goals. So could you kind of tell me where the Guard is in this short-term and long-range goal in addressing extremism within the ranks? And how pervasive have you found, just kind of doing your short-term goal and assessment, that it is for extremism to be found in the National Guard? Do you think it's similar? Have you had conversations, because you are part of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs? Is it similar to your active duty counterparts? And then, what things that you're looking at doing? Some of them is going to be funding, some of it is not going to be funding. So just kind of help this committee understand short-term what we're doing on extremism, and some of the things you think we need to do long-term to have people realize standing up, taking an oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States is something that they need to implement, not only in their life as a Guards person, but how that doing things privately can affect their ability to serve based on the way that we're going to be examining extremism within our ranks.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So when I look at the fact we're a component of both the Army and the Air Force, within the Air National Guard and the Army National Guard, they're following the training that has been put out by the services. And I've actually attended the Army one as well. Due to the nature of the fact we just drill one weekend a month, and in our summer training, we have until June to complete that. And so on our weekly calls with the adjutants general, I remind them of that, the importance of getting that done in the scheduled time frame. When we look at the pervasiveness across the force, I do not see it as very pervasive from all the information that I've been given. However, any case at all, as far as I'm concerned, is not acceptable, not only within the National Guard, but within the Department of Defense. And as you mentioned, every one of the members of the National Guard do swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States, and they also swear an oath to the Constitution of the state from which they serve. And I've been close in touch with our senior leaders within the organization to really reemphasize across the force that if our soldiers or airmen see something, that they say something. And then that allows our chain of command to deal with it, or if it exceeds their responsibilities, it goes on to work with local law enforcement to make sure that everything goes addressed and nothing gets overlooked.
Thank you. Mr. Calvert?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on that subject, General, if you could get us a definition of how you define extremism, I'd like to know. If you can get that for the committee, how the military in general is looking at that, that would be helpful to me. But I'm going to go to unfunded priorities. General, the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act added the Chief of National Guard Bureau to the list of officers required to provide an unfunded priority to the priorities list of Congress. We'll be receiving the unfunded priorities list from you, I guess, sometime this fiscal year following the transmission of the budget request. So hopefully that's soon. So any comment on that?
No, sir, thank you for the opportunity. I think that's very important to recognize for us also our unfunded priorities list, because in many cases our stuff is dual use equipment that we could use not only in the warfight, but also here domestically. And I think recognition of that and the ability to provide that is greatly appreciated by the entire National Guard.
Okay, well, we'll be looking forward to getting a hold of that list. General, as you know, I've been very supportive of the creation of a space guard, especially for states that have existing significant space missions, such as California. Can you update the subcommittee on the progress the Department of Defense is making in providing recommendations on the creation of a space guard?
Yes, sir. In fact, I believe we're fairly close on that. I'll meet with the Secretary of the Air Force tomorrow and the Chief of Space Operations. And we've had an opportunity to brief the Deputy Secretary of Defense already. And I think our final meeting will be in preparation of meeting with the Secretary of Defense. And right now, both the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Space Operations are in agreement with us of a two-component construct, that of an active and reserve combination, a combined component, and then a Space National Guard.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing that. One other question in this series, Mr. Womack, as you know, as a former guardsman, and as you know, both of you know that you're both painfully aware of, the Guard often ends up being the bill payer for when defense budgets are tight. And I suspect this year is going to be a real tight bill, seems. Given the lack of growth in this year's proposed defense budget, and the critical importance of maintaining readiness, lethality, equipment, weapon systems, what are the foreseeable circumstances or consequences if Congress does not prioritize the Guard and reserve equipment account?
When I look at that, I'm not sure exactly what those consequences will be. That's something that we'll look at very closely when the budget rolls out. But any flatlining or reduction at all will obviously have an impact on our readiness and potentially our equipment maintenance and also our facilities maintenance. But as we look to the future, there's also other possibilities there where we look our nation's need to retain certain capability and capacity, that there might be a time to really look at our active reserve component mix to identify if some of our forces maybe should be moved into the reserve component where we can maintain that capability at a lower cost.
Okay, I'll look forward to working with you on that, and I'll yield back and look forward to the second round. Thank you.
Thank you. When you're reporting, General, Mr. Calvert asked great questions. I'm looking forward to a breakdown on how much this is going to cost to set up a reserve and a Guard Space Force, as you're referring to. What would it look like in all 50 states, and if it's kind of a hybrid where you're using facilities that are already in existence with the Air Force where they're in states. So we'll follow up with some questions, but I think Mr. Calvert launched some particularly good questions. Mr. Quay, you were dealing with a flat tire. Are you in a position now in your office where you can ask a question, or I can go to Ms. Bustos and let you catch your breath?
No, I'm ready. I was looking for Pete Aguilar to help me change the tire, but he wasn't around.
Oh, we can barely hear you, Henry. And Pete, you should help colleagues with their tires. So you want to try it again, Henry, Mr. Quay, so we can hear you?
Yes. And first of all, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you
She's
for
still
our
in this
witnesses.
car.
Let me just ask you this question about the issue of the National Guard on the border. I really appreciate what you're all doing on the border, but is there any way? Because I've seen the National Guard, be at the detention centers or the shelters. Is there any way you can help the Border Patrol with a strategy on securing the border? I mean, I know that you all are in communication with them and you work closely with them, but I still think that your military training can help us and help the Border Patrol secure the border better. And I'm not talking about the unaccompanied kids or the family units. Those are not danger to our communities. I'm talking about the single adults that are trying to come into the U.S. that have a different motive. So can you all come up with a different strategy instead of being at shelters taking care of babies? And I've seen them do several things. Any way y'all can come up with a different strategy with Border Patrol?
Hey, Congressman, that's a great question. And the primary responsibility for that falls under U.S. Northern Command under General Van Herk. And I know the Joint Task Force North, commanded by a National Guard officer, actually Randall Simmons. I know that they work closely with the Border Patrol, but I'm not sure if they have asked for assistance to do that. But if asked and approved, I'm sure that's something that we would love to help with if asked.
Yeah, and just to finish up on this, look, I've seen your men and women; they do a great job. The support services, I've seen them man cameras. I've seen them at the shelters with logistics of the food. But I think your capacity or your abilities are not being utilized this way. And if you all could just direct us, the committee, as to where we ought to be looking at to get you to be, so we can fully utilize your capabilities at the border instead of, without due respect, babysitting cameras, babysitting the unaccompanied kids. It's very important. I understand that. But I think with the training that the men and women, the professionals that there are, I think you all could be better utilized at the border, with all due respect. And I always tell my friend Ken Calvert, I don't come visit. I live on the border. So actually, I'm on the border. I'm actually going to the border in about an hour and a half on a particular side. But I just want to utilize the abilities of the professionals, men and women at the Guard.
Yes, sir. And we look forward to the opportunity to follow up with you and also with U.S. Northern Command.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers and then Ms. Bustos.
Let me say that if the gentleman needs an extra tire, I'll find it. I'll find it. But I knew he would one of these days run the wheels off that car. General, thank you for being with us today, but more importantly, thank you for the service to your country that you have performed for many, many years. And we want to thank you again, as the chair indicated earlier, for you and your soldiers, for the security that you gave to members of Congress, to the Congress itself, as well as the whole country. Many thousands of soldiers left their families and their hometown jobs to render service to us, and we thank you for that. And as of April 30th, you still had 2,298 guardsmen and airmen from 18 states and DC, supporting civilian authorities, including the Capitol Police and Secret Service, in the National Capital Region related to January 6th and post-inaugural security. So you're still with us, and we thank you for that service. That's fewer personnel than had been deployed last summer, when 41,500 were supporting state and local law enforcement in support of civil unrest operations. Let me ask you, just how taxing has all of this been, including the border, not to mention civil unrest all across the country. How taxing has this mission been for the Guard over the last year?
So, Congressman, when I keep in very close touch with the adjutants general and actually speak with them once a week. And in my visits there, we've been fortunate to meet every single mission requirement we were given over the past 16 months, really going back prior to COVID. But as you highlight, a lot of these missions has become more enduring. It adds a little bit more stress on each of our soldiers and airmen. And everything we try and do is balance their ability to manage their civilian career, their military career, and their family. And we never want to put them in a situation where they've got to choose one over the other. When we look at the economic impact to our nation over the past year, in many cases, this employment provided relief to some of those soldiers. But as our economy continues to improve, the employers are asking for their soldiers to come back to work. And so we're watching that very closely, looking at every tasking. And if you look at the state's willingness to support, of course, we're heavily involved in vaccinations right now. But as that stabilizes, we're hoping to off-ramp some of that mission set to reduce the operational tempo.
Please switch gears. As a former Guardsman, I know firsthand the importance of interoperability between the Guard and the active components of our military. Because of that, I'm concerned that the Army Guard doesn't operate and train with any MQ-1C Gray Eagle drones, a vital tool within the active component. What are your plans to ensure maximum interoperability, especially regarding UAV capabilities?
Well, sir, thank you for that question. And thank you, sir, for your service in the National Guard as well. When we look at the Army Guard in particularly, last year we were able to start realigning the 8 divisions of the National Guard with the subordinate brigades, our brigade combat teams, combat aviation brigades, and maneuver enhancement brigades. And so what we're trying to do is to provide our nation not only 10 active duty Army divisions, but also 8 National Guard divisions. And that's where this specific case comes into play. So when you look at a division level asset, we know that we need to modernize our formations, and we work very closely to make sure whatever the Army modernizes, we have the same equipment in the National Guard so that we're interoperable on the battlefield. And so when we look with the Army on their long-term work with that program, sir, we'll want to be part of that to make sure that we look, act, and operate the same.
Mr. Rogers, I don't know if we're having a technical issue. You had about 20 seconds left. It looks like we're having a technical difficulty, and if your staff gets a hold of our staff, we'll add that on to your next question. Ms. Bustos and then Mr. Cole.
All righty. Thank you very much, Chairwoman McCollum. And also I want to thank Ranking Member Calvert for holding this very important hearing. General Hokanson, thank you for your service, your leadership of our citizen soldiers and our airmen. I know how proud you are. We are equally proud. And as you noted in your opening testimony and answers today, the effectiveness and the efficiency of our National Guard depends greatly on their flexibility, on logistics, on transportation. And you know that I'm also proud to represent the great airmen of the 182nd Airlift Wing in Peoria. We've talked about that many times. They regularly maintain the highest mission capability rate in the Air National Guard's C-130 community. They're doing this with Vietnam-era aircraft, yet they are, to the motto, always ready and always there, providing tactical air mobility when we need them, whether it's for homeland or overseas operations. So what I'd like to ask you, General, the 182nd at Peoria, like many other Air National Guard C-130H units, is at risk of losing their aircraft as the Air Force continues to push to decrease the overall number of C-130s in the nation. So wondering, does it make sense to you to decrease our tactical airlift capabilities? That's question one, and one B of that would be, how would this affect your ability to respond to homeland emergencies while also providing airlift for federal missions overseas?
Congresswoman, thank you for that question. And so when I look at the number of C-130 wings, in fact, I would really look at all of our flying squadrons in the Air National Guard. I think it's absolutely important that we retain every single one of those flying squadrons because of what they bring for our nation. And one of the concerns I do have is when you look at the mobility capabilities study that's done annually, when they look at that, they oftentimes don't take into account the domestic use or domestic operations that our C-130s particularly do. And if you look at last year, there was over 600 missions done by 75 different aircraft in 16 different states. And when you don't account for that, I think it gives you a different picture that would make you think that you could reduce that capability. But when we look at the fact that the homeland is no longer a sanctuary and is an area that we need to be very concerned about any future operations, we need to account for that and make sure that we have the capabilities resident within the nation to respond to those.
General, how important is the 182nd in Peoria to when you look at the domestic missions and the C-130Hs? Can you talk specifically to that?
Well, ma'am, if you look at, and I'll just use the DC mission as an example. We were able to bring 26,000 guardsmen here in less than 2 weeks, and 14 or just under 14,000 of them were transported by Air National Guard aircraft. And had we not had the ability to draw on those aircraft literally at no notice, it would have really compounded the time frame it would have taken us to get everybody here. But ma'am, those are absolutely critical to all of our communities and everything that we do. And not only that, but also to our warfight overseas, the tactical capability that they provide, which is the reason we have them in the National Guard, is critical to our nation's defense.
So if you play that out in the 182nd at Peoria with the C-130Hs, let's say under the circumstances that we've all just lived through, where you had these missions and you got the 26,000 men and women in uniform out to Washington D.C. You take the 182nd out. How does that play out under the circumstances that we've all just lived through?
So I don't know the specifics related to that squadron, ma'am, but I think the overall intent we would like to do is see every one of our squadrons modernized so that they remain relevant well into the future for whatever our nation needs them to do.
Okay, consider me a partner in this. I've got a question about healthcare, but with 35 seconds left, I know the chairwoman is strict about her time, and I'm glad she is. So, General, again, thank you for your service and appreciate your perspective on this. Very helpful. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bustos. And Minnesota and Illinois National Guard delivered people on time. Mr. Coleman and Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Very much, Madam Chair. Following my good friend from Illinois, I'd be remiss not to say we serve on this committee and on the Labor Age Committee together, how much I'm going to miss her and certainly respect her decision we all, leave when we want to, but my friend from Illinois and I have dealt with legislation together. She's been a very productive member of the Appropriations Committee in the United States Congress, and we will miss you, my friend. I will also just add for the record, we're normally in committee, I sit between Mr. Rogers, who is not only a former member of the Kentucky Guard, but was the Kentucky Guardsman of the Year in 1960 and belongs to the Kentucky Guard Hall of Fame. And then on my left, I've got Steve Womack, who did 30 years in the Arkansas Guard and left as a full colonel. So I feel like I really should be quiet and listen to these two. But I've got a couple of questions. First of all, General, like everybody in this panel, I want to tell you how much I appreciate your personal service and the service of the men and women of the Guard, what a difference it makes in all our states, what a difference it's made to our country. You're coming off a really tough year. You've been deployed in multiple circumstances. None of us like you to see you deployed in civil disturbances, but you've had to do that obviously in Washington, D.C. We've all seen the tremendous job your men and women did here, and we're all grateful for that. We've also seen multiple times in other states around the country when you've been called upon by local authorities, by the governor of states. So I'm curious, I know these sorts of situations aren't remotely predictable. There's considerable expense, obviously, involved in all of these kinds of deployments. So number one, can you give us some idea of the scope of the expense to the Guard, of the activities dealing with civil unrest over the last year, all of them across the country? And second, how will you be compensated? I know you've had to sort of rob Peter to pay Paul out of multiple accounts here to get these things done. We need to be very cognizant of that and recognize that you have ongoing operations and maintenance and things like that we know. So I'm just trying to get a handle on the number we would need to think about to make sure that you are whole after this unusual series of deployments.
Yes, sir. So when we look at the mission scheduled to go through the 23rd of May, and the current funding that we have identified, that the cost is basically $521.9 million, or just under $522 million. The key there is that we will really need assistance with that by the middle of May. And if we don't receive the funding by the 1st of August, it could have a significant impact on our readiness and maintenance across the force. And so thank you for bringing that. And we're made the department here well aware of the importance of that funding.
Are there other missions around the country that are similarly civil that are additional costs there, or has that been covered adequately up to this point?
Yes, sir. So if we go back to the height in June, we had 43,000 guardsmen mobilized across the nation in support of civil disturbance operations. A lot of those costs were basically taken by the states under state active duty. And I don't know the full amount on by state how much was spent. Unlike in COVID-19, where that was reimbursed through FEMA.
Okay, thank you very much. One other area, and I want to pick up on a topic that my friend, the ranking member, raised. I do think these unmet needs, document is going to be very important to this committee. I mean, my personal belief, and I speak only for myself, is that just looking at the president's skinny budget, it's too much domestic spending, too little spending on defense. My guess is if we're going to get to a deal, one number is going to go up, the defense number, and the other number is probably going to come down, and there's probably a deal to be had there somewhere. But I think it's really important that we get a feel for exactly what you need if that occurs, so that we're not just throwing money willy-nilly out there. So I would just, I know this is the first time we're going to see this kind of document, but I think it's extraordinarily important to be prioritized in a way so that if we did have extra money, we spent it in a way that was most useful to you and the men and women under your plan. Okay, with that, I don't have a lot of time left, and I'm going to follow the example of my good friend from Illinois, recognize the power of the chair, and yield back before I offend her.
Well, the chair thinks you asked an excellent question to get a real good detailed list. Ms. Kilpatrick and then Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate so much the General's testimony. I represent a border district, and the National Guard has been so important. And I've been very, very impressed at how quickly they've mobilized when we need them. And these are men and women who have other jobs. A lot of them do the National Guard part-time, and they respond immediately. And so my question is, we really count on you, especially in the border communities, to keep us safe from drug trafficking and crime. That's our top priority. So the National Guard counter drug programs are vital force multipliers in preventing narcotics from entering and spreading throughout our country. In your testimony, you shared that the National Guard counter-drug operations supported over 1,300 law enforcement agencies and 439 community-based organizations, to include training nearly 60,000 law enforcement personnel. The impact of the program is clear, and it needs to continue. However, since fiscal year 2013, the budget request for these efforts has decreased and Congress has consistently added money. Do you anticipate an expansion of these programs in fiscal year 2022? Will the budget request reflect the importance and impact of these programs? Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Congresswoman, I know we have not seen the budget yet, so I'm not sure of the exact figures. But when I look at the historical, we've really relied on congressional ads to fill the full requirement, and we greatly appreciate that support.
Ms. Kilpatrick, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you, I yield back.
Thank you.
No, thank you, I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Mr. Diaz-Balart and then Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. General, again, I will just add my words of gratitude to you and to all of the Guards heroes who do an amazing job. So thank you. A lot of the things that I was going to ask, Madam Chairwoman, have already been covered, which is good. But I do want to add or ask you a couple of things. I'm concerned, as was said before by the ranking member, that the Guard usually pays the bills if there are reductions to be had. One of the areas that I think it would be interesting just to know if and how much you are spending is on non-traditional related Guard issues. And what I mean by that are, like, for example, environmental expenses. If you're on alternative fuels, on climate change, that kind of stuff, it'd be great to have an accounting of how much you all are spending on that kind of thing, just to know, because there's so many different buckets of that, and how much you're foreseeing to spend in the next year. That's point number one. Point number two, on the issue of extremism, which I think is a crucial issue. I mean, I would argue that obviously, communism, Marxism, whether it's the North Korean model, the Chinese model, the former Soviet model, the Cuban model, the Venezuelan model is obviously an extremist ideology, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. So the question, I think it was, I don't know who it was, who asked you how the military is now defining extremism, is a group that claims to be, their leadership claims to be trained by Marxists. Would that be considered an extremist organization? I'm curious to know if Marxism is one of those groups, one of those ideologies, which obviously is a dangerous anti-American ideology that you are also looking at and considering to be extremist. If so, great. If not, why not? And so, as I said, Madam Chairwoman, a lot of my questions were already asked on the budgetary issues. So we're all being really well behaved, Madam Chairwoman, and we're all returning time, which is kind of unusual, and I will lead by doing that as well. So I yield back. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Diaz-Balart, I think you asked a really good question, as did Mr. Calvert. The definition needs to be universal, well understood, and meet the needs of protecting our Constitution and protecting our democracy. So what does extremism mean? So I really appreciate the discussion that we're starting to have about that, and I hope the authorizers are having it as well. Mr. Aguilar, and then Mr. Ryan, if you're still available, could your staff let us know? And then after Mr. Ryan, to be Ms. Capter. Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Ranking Member, and General Hawkinson. Just following up on my friend from Florida and my colleague from California, the Ranking Member, I think that those are fair questions to ask the Secretary when he comes before us as well, as he details and as the Pentagon details definition for extremism. General Hawkinson, in your testimony, you highlighted that Guard members have fought fires over 9 million acres in 2020. In my home state of California, the National Guard has become a key player in fighting wildfires. And this has been especially true during this fire season that is very untraditional now and is extended basically throughout the year. What resources does the National Guard require in the upcoming fiscal year to continue to support efforts to combat wildfires in the West and respond to other natural disasters?
So, Congressman, when I look at the fires and having grown up in that area, when we look at the scope and scale, it's really almost unprecedented. We look back in history, I think it was over 10 million acres were burned this past year. And so one of the most important things we look at is the use of our C-130s with the MAFs, or the Mobile Airborne Firefighting System. And we really appreciate the ad last year that allowed us to buy the first two of what we determined as 8 as a requirement to be upgraded. And there's 6 additional systems at a cost of $60 million, would allow us to equip all of our C-130 MAFs aircraft to continue to fight forest fires. Aside from the MAFs aircraft, we also use our MQ-9s, or unmanned aerial systems, for fire mapping, which is extremely helpful, not only for our folks, but also in terms of the Forest Service and also the state forest managers. We also use a lot of our helicopters as well. And so we often use our NAGRIA funding to buy additional buckets or firefighting equipment related to that. And then we also do train ground crews as well, and we equip those locally within the state. Those are also assets that we can provide. And as you mentioned, we look at it more now as a fire year, no longer a fire season. And one initiative that we did start this year is we had a firefighting symposium earlier this year. And we're starting to look at it more like hurricanes, where we meet and do an all hazards conference in New Orleans every year. This year we did it virtually, but we recognize all the states that may be impacted and potential capability shortfalls within their state, either because units may be deployed or they just don't have that capability. And now we're looking at doing the same in the Western and all those states that suffer from forest fires, to help identify if those helicopters are being mobilized, like Washington and California this year, to identify and train those air crews prior to season. So if there's an additional need in any of the states, they know exactly where they'll draw those from and hopefully minimize the impact of those fires.
Thanks, General. One last question. Early in the pandemic, we all know that the Guard was instrumental in the supply chain logistics to ensure that frontline workers had the supplies that they needed. And recently, the Guard has helped administer over 6 million COVID-19 vaccines to Americans across the country. Here in the West, we know that the Guard has played a key role at Cal State Los Angeles at vaccination sites. As well. As we continue to vaccinate millions of Americans, what do you foresee the role of the Guard in supporting and combating the pandemic, and as that changes?
So, Congressman, I'm actually happy to announce we went over 10 million shots this morning, and that's a great testament to our cooperation with all of the local communities and the support that we get. And it's a very interesting question. So when I go back to the first time that the Adjutant General from Washington State mentioned that they had an outbreak in one of their long-term care facilities, what we have done and how we've supported our communities continues to evolve. And I think it's the great relationship and partnership we have with our local communities that help identify those needs that we can fill in the short term until the community can develop the capability to meet that. So going forward, I'm sure that we'll continue to help with vaccination efforts as long as needed. And then, just depending on what the future holds, we'll be ready there to meet whatever our communities ask of us.
Thank you, General. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Great questions. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it, General. Great to see you. After a ton of phone calls, it's good to at least see you live and in person. Appreciate your leadership. Thank you for everything. Post January 6th, you were showing an enormous amount of leadership. So I think on behalf of everyone, we just want to say thanks to you and all the men and women who were here from around the country to help make sure that the inauguration and we were able to get our house in order here a little bit. So I want a special thanks to you for all of your leadership. 2 quick questions. A lot has been covered that I wanted to ask as well. Representative Palazzo and I, we've introduced legislation to provide a tax credit to small businesses that employ members of the Guard. We're getting ready to introduce a bill that would provide special and incentive pay parity to both the Guard and the Reserve. And I also believe that the restoration and maintenance backlog is extremely important. Is there anything else we can do, this subcommittee can do to help the Guard perform its mission? I know you touched on the healthcare piece as well with recruitment and retention and all of that.
Sorry, when I look at that, I know we've touched on a lot of these already. The TRICARE Reserve Select, or a healthcare, I think, for all of our service members who serve in uniform would be critically important. Also, and I know you touched on it, the FSRM, or additional funding for our facilities. Many of those are extremely old. In fact, I think over 30% of our Army National Guard armories are over 60 years old. So additional help there. And then lastly, I would say full-time support. We're in a very good place with the Air National Guard. We're about 30% of our force is full-time. But on the Army National Guard, our full-time support is about 16%. But more concerning is it's only about 64% of what the established requirement is. And so any additional funding we could get to support our full-time support within the Army National Guard would really help us become more efficient and, I think, effective with the resources we're given.
Okay. Quickly to General, and I know you touched upon this, and I hope you can get in a little bit more detail. I know you implemented several initiatives related to issues around mental health care in the Guard. Can you explain a little bit more about these programs and speak to whether or not you have the resources you need to make sure our members of the Guard are taken care of from a mental health side and a mental health promotion side? Are we doing enough in training to promote the kind of resiliency and the other issues around mental health that maybe we can take care of, and with regard to some of the training? And I know some of these, it's hard to unpack some of these from issues around finance and stress and personal life and a lot of the other things that are going on. But just if you can expand on that a little bit.
Yes, sir. And so if you go back to my priorities as the chief, my number one priority is people, followed by readiness, modernization, and reform. And throughout that, you'll see we've really, as I came on board, we've taken our warrior resilience and fitness throughout the organization and consolidated into a directorate, because what we found was really silos of excellence, but not a lot of crosstalk. And we felt that there were things in certain areas that could apply to other when it comes to any of these concerns that our people face. But one specific program I can talk about is a spring program. And what it does is it takes data analytics from across the country, I think down to county level, and looks at the various risk factors. And we're trying to get it to use it as a predictive analysis of certain areas of the country that may be stressed more than others, and to make the chain of command aware so that they can look for any symptoms within their organization that we could address in advance or preemptively before it's too late.
That's would love to see that data once you get it. That would be very interesting for us to know. One of the things we're working on too is to try in the across the board in the military is get a better sense of the adverse childhood experiences. The data on this is incredible as a predictor of behavior, probably of things like post-traumatic stress and other things that happen based on how many adverse childhood experiences you've had. And so we have that knowledge now. Why wouldn't we want to understand more about that with the men and women who are serving? So I appreciate it. Yeah, when you get that data, let us know. And thank you so much for all your leadership. We appreciate you, General. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. General Hokanson, it's great to see you again. And I hail from Northern Ohio, Toledo to Cleveland. You got everything that you've done to help us with this pandemic situation, and also on January 6th. I want to draw attention to a few areas. Number one, your state partnership program, which I fully support. I would appreciate a 1 or 2 page summary on what we could do to expand and improve that program based on your vast experience. Our region is connected to Hungary and to Serbia, and we have issues in Hungary. I would be very interested in recommendations you might have. I help found and co-chair the Hungarian caucus in the Congress, and we would look for recommendations there if possible. Number 2 in the area of youth challenge. Thank you so very much for expanding that reach across our country. Again, I would like a report there. In Ohio, we've tried to stand up a youth challenge, the only one that has being anticipated of being established in Ohio. I've talked to General Harris. We can't seem to lift that off the ground. Could somebody in your staff please tell me what's missing, why we can't do that? And also thank you for your help on Starbase. I support your efforts there very much. I wanted to ask your recommendations in 2 areas on a cross-government approach to 2 challenges. One, Congressman Ryan and others have talked about military medicine. I'm very interested in a cross-government approach from the military in a region like I represent, where I have many Guard and Reserve units who either have their command structure in the state capital or an adjoining state. So I have pieces of the dream in the region. And as I try to address issues like trauma and psychiatric care, it becomes very difficult. For example, we worked for years to place a Guard unit next to the only teaching hospital in the entire northern quarter of Ohio, northwest quarter of Ohio. And it was all set to go, and we ended up with an MP unit next to this medical hospital. It's like, if I'm trying to help military medicine as well as civilian medicine, how did that happen? I wish somebody in your command structure could explain that to me. I very much would like to have a medical unit there because we are very, very, I think, short in the military in terms of medical backup, and it's been almost impossible to achieve. The other thing I wanted to ask about was a cross-government approach using the Guard, but not only the Guard, on what we are about to endure in this region with the transformation of our transportation manufacturing and the move to a new energy age. If we don't do this right, we could end up like Appalachia. And I support and chair an energy committee in the Congress, but I'm very concerned about the way this is going to play out. And I think the military, with the units that are here through the Guard, we have an air base with F-16s, we have a reserve base with transport companies, we have an MP unit with transport. I think the Guard could become a showcase for new age energy vehicles. And I would like to challenge you as we face this across the industrial heartland to think about a way of becoming a star show where you are able to showcase vehicles, invite the community, show what's happening in the military with a lot of the new inventions that are occurring. And I just wanted to throw those at you. I don't expect you to answer this. You can comment today, but on our state partnership program, on Youth Challenge, on medical backup in the military, and an enlarged role for the Guard, and then on a cross-government approach to new vehicular manufacturing and the development of innovation, what role might you play? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
General, does that mean you're going to get back to Ms. Captor everything in writing, or do you want to take a minute?
Ma'am, we actually have that all written down. My staff, I've got one person here helping me do that, and we will definitely follow up on all of those, ma'am. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Captor.
I yield back my additional time.
So, General, before we turn to the second panel, there's a couple of things that we're going to be submitting to the committee for you to answer. One of them is a little more information on COVID-19. We'd be interested in knowing who's received the vaccine, what have been the impacts of some of your training efforts over the past year, and then whether or not the pandemic's made it more difficult to execute funding, particularly since military personnel and operation and maintenance dollars are one-year funding. And then workforce has been a big issue that's kind of come up in the service and in the private sector when it comes to cyber. So we're going to follow up with some questions about asking what you're doing to recruit people from active duty service when they leave to maybe join the Guard, and providing some of the cyber security units that we're looking at. How the training's been going. Do you have enough trainers available? And then a final question that we have. The Air Force, as you know, is planning on divesting its C-130 National Guard wings, the C-130s, and replacing them with National Guard cyber units known as Information Airfare wings, primarily on a Title X mission. So we've been trying to get some more information as to what that looks like, what the costs are going to be. And so we're going to follow up and ask you again for that in more detail. So, General, thank you for your time and your attention to the committee's service. We wish you, those who serve under you, and their families all the best health and well-being, and thank them so much for their service. Members, before we start the second panel, we are going to do a short recess. You don't have to do anything. The technical folks on the end are going to make sure that the next panel is ready to go. So hang tight. It'll only be maybe a minute or less. So for right now, we stand in recess until the call of the chair. We're now moved to panel 2, consisting of the leaders of the reserve components. Lieutenant General Jody Daniels, Chief of the Army Reserve, Vice Admiral John Munson, Chief of the Navy Reserve, Lieutenant General David Bolton, Commander of the Marine Corps Reserve, and Lieutenant General Richard Scobie of the Air Force Reserve. So I welcome all of you, distinguished general officers, to be witnesses today, and thank each of you for your service. And before I turn over to the testimony, I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Calvert, for a brief remark.
Thank you, Chair McCollum. In the interest of time, I'll keep my remarks brief, but I'd like to welcome our second panel of esteemed witnesses, particularly those who are appearing before us for the first time. Just as with the Guard, our reserve components have been quite busy this year, especially as they serve tirelessly to contribute to COVID-19. I'm interested to hear more about the needs that facing each of your services and what we as a subcommittee can do to help. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Calvert. So I would ask you to please go through your testimony in the order in which I introduced, and we will start with the Chief of the Army Reserve.
Chairwoman McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of the 200,000 soldiers and civilian employees of America's Army Reserve, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today and for your continued support for our soldiers, families, and employers. In an era of great power competition, the Army needs forces able to compete with adversaries, respond to crises, in conflict, and prepare for the future. That mission requires a dedicated Federal Reserve Force that is ready now and prepared to meet the challenges of tomorrow. That force is the Army Reserve. Although the Army Reserve accounts for only 20% of Army personnel, we contain nearly half of the Army's maneuver support and a quarter of its force mobilization capacity at a cost of just 6% of the total Army budget. Over the last 3 years, the Army Reserve is focused on rebuilding collective readiness to contend with a near peer in scale in large-scale combat operations as we transform for multi-domain operations. However, last year, like the rest of the world, we encountered an unforeseen threat. Our readiness paid dividends in unexpected ways. Within 24 hours of the President invoking involuntary mobilization authority in response to COVID-19, the Army Reserve aggregated critical medical capabilities and initiated one of the largest domestic mobilizations in our history. Within days, we assembled over 2,800 soldiers, including 1,200 healthcare professionals, and deployed them to crisis zones around the country. To date, over 4,500 Army Reserve soldiers have mobilized to support the nation's COVID-19 response. The Army Reserve continues to support COVID-19 response operations while ensuring the readiness and training of our soldiers and formations. Early in the pandemic, we focused on individual readiness and began using cloud-based tools to conduct virtual battle assemblies, and we implemented control measures to decrease risk during in-person gatherings. Despite an uncertain training environment, the Army Reserve has also continued to support combatant commanders. Since March 1st, 2020, we have mobilized almost 18,000 soldiers and 268 units to support operations around the globe. We've also developed a readiness concept known as the Army Reserve Mission Force, or Armed Force, to prepare our formations for competition, crisis, conflict, and change, or the 4 Cs. The Armed Force nests under the Army's Regional Aligned Readiness and Modernization Model, or REARM, and provides a common sense framework to align resources across the component and unit readiness cycles. While our Reserve maintains, we're shaping innovation to Army modernization efforts. The Army Reserve has created the 75th Innovation Command as technology scouts and to leverage the vast subject matter expertise gained through our civilian careers to assist Army Futures Command in its mission. Readiness and modernization, however, mean nothing without the soldiers in our formations. Ready and resilient soldiers, capable leaders, cohesive teams, strong families, and supportive employers are the key to a ready and capable reserve. We are aggressively addressing corrosives such as sexual assault, sexual harassment, extremism, racism, and stressors that are contributing to suicide that threaten to undermine our ability to build cohesive, fit, and disciplined teams and are counter to Army values and culture of dignity and respect. We are embracing and operationalizing the philosophy of "this is my squad." Sustaining critical operational capabilities requires consistent, adequate, and predictable funding to ensure the Army Reserve can meet the needs of our Army and our combatant commands across the full range of military operations. We are grateful for consistent appropriations that positively impact Army Reserve readiness and modernization efforts, including support of the National Guard and Reserve Equipping Account. The future holds many challenges, but today's Army Reserve is the best trained, best equipped, and striving every day to be the most ready Army Reserve in our nation's history. With your continued support, we will continue to build our strong foundation to meet the needs of the nation and shape the Army Reserve of tomorrow. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon, Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. It is my distinct honor to report to you on the status and the vision of America's Navy Reserve. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize my wife, Kim, whose steadfast support through my 3-decade Navy career exemplifies the sacrifices and the service typical of our military spouses. I'd also like to express my gratitude to Navy Reserve Force Master Chief Chris Coates, my partner and confidant who tirelessly advocates every day for our enlisted sailors across the force. Finally, I'd like to recognize the 109,000 sailors, our nearly 500 dedicated civilians, and the families who support them, as well as the thousands of employers who value and enable the service of our citizen sailors worldwide. They're all stakeholders in the success of our Navy Reserve. Your Navy Reserve sailors are flexible and responsive. This past year, in response to the coronavirus 19 pandemic, the Navy Reserve activated over 7,000 sailors in direct support of the nation's emergency response. I remain humbled by their agility, their capability, and their sacrifices, as well as the enduring support of their families. The Navy Reserve is strategic. Aligned with the National Defense Strategy, the Tri-Service Maritime Strategy, and the Chief of Naval Operations Navigation Plan, the Navy Reserve is at an inflection point, pivoting to develop the essential strategic depth necessary to support integrated all-domain naval power. This renewed focus will be critical to address the aggressive behavior we experience daily from a rising China, a resurgent Russia, and other authoritarian states who seek to disturb the rules-based international order. To this end, the singular priority of the Navy Reserve is simple: warfighting readiness. Modernization of our equipment, training systems, and mobilization processes will generate efficiencies that enhance our contribution to the total force at an attractive, resource-informed cost. Your Navy Reserve sailors are operational. To ensure our sailors are operating relevant modern equipment, procurement of the Juliet variant to replace legacy C-130 aircraft is the Navy Reserve's #1 equipment priority. Given the Air Force and the Marine Corps have already transitioned to the Juliet, we are the sole service still flying the Tango airframe, which pressurizes our supply chain. With an average age approaching 3 decades and a mission-capable rate of 25%, the current C-130 Tango fleet is challenged to meet sustained fleet logistics requirements. The C-130 Juliet, on the other hand, with a mission-capable rate of 75%, would provide an additional $200 million per year in transportation cost savings to the Navy. Similarly, modernization of the Navy Reserve high-end adversary aircraft is aligned with the Navy's divestment of legacy FA-18 Hornets. Increasing Navy Reserve capability and capacity to support Navy adversary requirements will extend active component strike fighter service life, while concurrently enabling the dedication of precious fleet aircraft and flight hours to fleet-specific operational missions. The Reserve Force prioritizes outcomes over activities. The totality of the Navy Reserve modernization also includes enhancing the processes and systems employed to mobilize our sailors. The first structural modernization since 9/11, adaptive mobilization will increase current activation capacity 15-fold, while reducing the mobilization timeline by 80%, effectively activating our entire force in 30 days. Integral to this process is the implementation of the Navy Personnel and Pay System, NP2, the most significant important administrative enhancement in decades, which will be fully operational in January of 22. Navy Reserve sailors are one team. Central and vital to the generation of critical enduring advantage are our people. The Navy Reserve continues to forge a culture of excellence based on the Navy's core values of honor, courage, and commitment, and our core attributes: integrity, accountability, toughness, and initiative. We're dedicated to fostering the diverse, inclusive culture that generates our decisive warfighting advantage. They are a warfighting winning team, and they're ready. That said, delivering surge and warfighting ready maritime forces to the total force would be impossible without your continued support. Timely delivery of a fiscal year 22 appropriations bill will provide predictability to our sailors, to their families, and to our global combatant commanders. Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, I remain humbled every day by the commitment and contribution that I see in our sailors, our dedicated civilians, and the supporting families that collectively are your Navy Reserve. They all serve our nation with distinction every day in every theater around the globe, 24/7, 365. They are the sentinels of our security. I thank you for your support and your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I know that the Air Force screen has gone blank again. I know they're working on things, but we are going to hear from the Marines next. Thank you.
Chair McCollum, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and to testify on behalf of the Commandant of the Marine Corps about your Marine Corps Reserve. I'm honored to appear with my fellow Reserve Component Service Chiefs and my senior enlisted advisors, Force Sergeant Major Carlos Ruiz, who is here with me today, and Force Command Master Chief Kerry Wesser. The mission of the Marine Corps Reserve is to augment, reinforce, and sustain the active component. We have reserve forces forward deployed alongside and integrated into their active component counterparts, supporting numerous combatant commander requirements on a daily basis. Over the past year, more than 1,000 Marines and sailors from the reserve component activated and deployed to support 20 operational requirements across 6 geographic combatant commands. Despite the ongoing global pandemic, the Marine Corps Reserve has continued to train, equip, and prepare for the next fight, ensuring the safety of Marines, sailors, and their families during each in-person drill and exercise that was conducted. I want to thank each of the members for your support to the Marine Corps' Force Design Initiative over the past year. While this has necessitated the closure of our reserve tank units and bridging companies, we could not have begun our transition to a more nimble and lethal force without your assistance. I want to thank my fellow service chiefs, particularly the National Guard, for their support. They have been tireless in helping reserve warriors find new places to serve during our force design transition period. I would also like to acknowledge Admiral Mustin and the United States Navy Reserve for being an outstanding partner in our ongoing effort to better integrate our Navy and Marine Corps Reserve teams to ensure we are postured for the future fight. Despite the tremendous pressures and obstacles of COVID-19 that has presented, I'm pleased to inform you that the morale in your Marine Corps Reserve remains high, as evidenced by our reserve component end strength maintaining 99% of our total requirement. Not only are we attracting new Marines, but they are also committing to service beyond their contractual obligation. On any drill weekend, an average of 25% of the Marines standing in formation are not contractually obligated to be there. Every month, these Marines have a decision to make, and they choose to continue to serve with and lead their fellow Marines and sailors. I'm always impressed by the professionalism, competence, dedication to duty, and motivation of our Reserve Marines. The way they balance family responsibilities, civilian careers, and school with their military service is nothing short of extraordinary. Like their active duty brothers and sisters, they serve selflessly to protect our great nation. They continue to answer their irrational call to serve. As Secretary Austin highlighted, our most critical asset is our people. The Marine Corps Reserve must promote and retain the very best Marines and sailors, regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, or background. Through the diversity of thoughts and actions, we can find more creative and innovative solutions to future problems. We are actively developing new initiatives and strategies to help achieve a more diverse and ultimately a more talented Marine Corps Reserve. We will need all the Marines and sailors to contribute to solving the increasingly complex problems that we will face in the future. I want to thank this committee for your continued support to the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Appropriation. As you may recall, last year I requested your support for my effort to use NAGRIA funds to remedy the deficiency of individual combat clothing and equipment with the Marine Corps Reserve. As ICCE becomes more expensive in the future, a more flexible NAGRIA is a key tool Congress can help employ to help protect our warfighters. In closing, I want to extend my gratitude for your ongoing efforts to provide timely appropriations each year. This does have a direct impact on your Reserve Marines and sailors and their limited number of training days. Your continued support will help to ensure the Marine Corps Reserve will have predictable and uninterrupted training schedules to maximize personnel, material, and training readiness. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Calvert, it appears that Lieutenant General Scobie is having problems getting his video up. If his audio is working, are you comfortable with him just giving his presentation without a video?
Sure, she can do it on the on that. That's great.
Kyle, let's see if Lieutenant General Scobie can hear and start their testimony.
Chair McCollum, I'm having no trouble hearing you, and I apologize. My video is frozen here, but everybody else's appears to be working. So
we can hear you just fine, so please go ahead, sir.
All right, Chair McCollum and Ranking Member Calvert and distinguished members of the subcommittee, it's an honor for me to be here today with my other service counterparts and to represent the Airmen of the Air Force Reserve. I'm joined virtually by Chief Master Sergeant Tim White, my senior enlisted advisor. As a command team, we are continually amazed at the accomplishment of our reserve citizen airmen, despite every challenge that has emerged over the past year. The Air Force Reserve is a cost-effective, accessible, and ready force. We provide strategic depth with rapid surge capability across every Air Force core mission set. And we do so cost-effectively because we are predominantly a part-time force. We are accessible as a force, contributing globally to the Joint Force operations daily. And finally, we are a ready force. When the nation needed rapid pandemic response, we had medical personnel on the ground in New York and New Jersey within 48 hours. We provide strategic depth for national defense while operating on only 3% of the total Department of the Air Force budget. We are committed to attracting top talent by fostering a culture of inclusion in which every airman is valued and can thrive. With Congress's assistance, we preserved pre-pandemic gains in both individual and unit level readiness across the force through innovations such as virtual training. We modernized key weapon systems and we lessened the critical manpower shortfalls we had been suffering for the previous years. We increased our organizational effectiveness and enhanced our ability to provide excellent care for our citizen airmen and their families through internal reforms and process improvements. The Air Force Reserve invests every congressionally enacted dollar for maximum return. We're grateful for the $19.5 million we received in CARES Act funding, which allowed us to rapidly scale our telework capability to protect our workforce during this pandemic. We're also grateful for the continued direct hiring authority for critical career fields. Last year, with this authority, we significantly increased our Air Reserve technician pilot manning from where it was at 75% to today to 97%. Our requested fiscal year 2022 budget will ensure the Air Force Reserve meets the National Defense Strategy's objective with the multi-domain force that we need. We're in lockstep with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force's vision to accelerate change or lose. And in order to do that, we have to be able to compete with our nation's adversaries across the spectrums of conflict. We must continue to capitalize on our readiness gains. We diligently request only those funds we can execute. Our reserve personnel appropriations and operational maintenance funds drive our readiness. These accounts fund our training, our flying hours, our mobilization requirements, our equipment maintenance, and our salaries. In particular, our flying hours and civilian pay programs have taken considerable reductions in recent years, rightfully due to insufficient justification and an overestimation of the funding requests that we needed. We have made significant internal strides in adjusting these accounts. I look forward to working with you to enhance readiness and reduce risk within our FY22 budget. I also want to thank you for enabling access to TRICARE Reserve Select, which we've heard a lot about today. We are all in agreement this major legislative accomplishment will offer affordable continuity of care for our members and their families. However, the legislation currently does not go into effect until 2030. To improve our readiness and improve our reserve force's quality of life, I request your support for accelerated implementation of funding of this healthcare access. And one final area I would like to touch on is equipment parity. We accomplish this primarily through the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Appropriation, INGREA. It enables us to modernize equipment, sustain our capability, and replace obsolete equipment to maintain parity with our active component when recapitalization is not feasible. Parity is critical to seamless total force integration. We remain grateful for these appropriations and cannot overemphasize how vital they are to our readiness. I appreciate your support for INGREA now and in the future. Thank you for your opportunity to appear before you today and for your steadfast support as we ensure the Air Force Reserve remains prepared to defend our great nation and the American people. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. You came in loud and clear. It is my intention to save my question and kind of some of the homework assignments that I gave the first panel at the end. So the order in which I'm proceeding with Mr. Calvert, you help me if there's other members on your side who are going to want to log back in. And this is the order I would have it be Ms. Kirkpatrick, yourself, Mr. Calvert, Calvert, Mr. Aguilar, Mr. Cole, Ms. Capter, Ms. Diaz-Balart, and then I would save my summary questions for the end. Okay, so Ms. Kirkpatrick, are you able to join us? If not, the next Democrat, because I'm going to go at the end, would be Mr. Aguilar. Ms. Capter, I see you. Would you like to start?
Of Air Force, oops, is that on? In
Yes,
terms
go
of
on.
Air Force, General Scobie, I wanted to ask you relative to cyber reservists. Do you look at cyber as a growth area for the Air Force Reserve?
Congresswoman, that is absolutely what we look at as in a growth area. So we have the areas that we have really been focusing on for the last almost decade now is cyber, ISR, and space. Cyber has been one of those growth areas, and along in concert with my other service chiefs that are here today, we've been looking hard with General Nakasone on how we would make sure that we're bringing in not only airmen that are and DoD personnel that are great at cyber, but also those that we can capture from the civil work that they're doing in their communities as well. So I would say it's absolutely that way. And what we want to do is make sure that we're meeting what General Nakasone needs from us by bringing in the right skill sets at the right time.
All right. Are you looking in communities that are diverse to recruit?
Yes, ma'am. Diversity is one of the strengths of the things that we do in the Air Force Reserve. So we look across all communities. What we try to do is bring in not only in areas where there is high potential for attracting cyber folks, and that would be, Bay Area would be a good example of that, but also in communities across our nation where there are folks that have that talent and the skill set that we need. And in working with the rest of the services in the Air National Guard, ensuring that we have cells of expertise where we can bring in these folks so they don't have to travel so far to be able to work with the military. So
I would encourage you to take a look at the 180th Fighter Wing in Ohio and see what kind of a marriage you might develop there. I appreciate your answer, and we don't have much time, so I have to go to Naval Reserve here for a second and ask Vice Admiral Mustin, in terms of the Naval Reserve, do you have to change structurally because of the threats from Russia and China? And I'm particularly interested in Russia, not that I don't care about China, but Russia's in my focus clearly with what's happening right now. And what resources will you require to meet the needs of a new day on the sea?
Thank you, ma'am, for the great question. And the short answer is yes, we are changing. And it's not just about Russia. I know that's your focus, but I would say at a broader level, the transition from the global war on terror to the great power competition environment requires us to build new capabilities, often in areas that don't exist now, as well as to build additional capability in those that exist already. Your great question to my colleague, Rich Scobie, about cyber is indeed a growth area for us. That is an area that is directly applicable across the Atlantic and looking at our adversary of Russia. We're also working very closely with our fleet commanders, however, to determine what they need specifically from their reserve force. In general, that's surge capability and enduring capability for command and control, as well as afloat and expeditionary maintenance and restoring seagoing ratings to the fleet. So the short answer is yes, we are going to continue to evolve. And that's frankly part of our initiative that transitions us for GPC readiness. As it relates to what we will require, I've presented to our Vice Chief and our Chief of Naval Operations already a multi-phase transformation, which takes existing end strength within the reserve and divest legacy capabilities in lieu of underwriting new capabilities. So I can do this with the existing end strength, but there may be opportunities for us to grow the reserve force. That, however, is not a decision that is solely within the reserve. That's a Navy decision and a joint force decision. So together with my counterparts in the reserve and the active component, we'll define the requirements wherein the Navy Reserve can offer the best solution. And where so, we will build new capabilities. And
thank you. I have to interrupt you because I do have only less than a minute left, and I wanted to go to Army Reserve for a second to General Daniels. and to mention the 983rd Transport Company in Ohio. By letter, could you let me know what I can do to build on the capability there and to better serve those who've served in it medically?
Absolutely.
Because the command structures in Ohio, the command structures in Illinois, the reservists are here in Ohio and the general Great Lakes region. So I'm very interested in their medical needs. What more you can tell me, what we can do to help them.
Yes, Congresswoman, we'll take a look at that and report back to you.
Thank you very much. And we got 5 seconds. We can build back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Calvert and then Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for General Scobie. First, I want to thank the General and the 53rd Weather Squadron. The Air Force Reserve Weather Reconnaissance Squadron has and continues to be looking into the atmospheric river issue in California. As you know, we're in a severe drought, and looking at the forecast for those events is extremely important. And as you observe and hopefully see weather storms coming our direction that may form over the Pacific is critical for the state of California. So I thank you for that mission. Going back to, you mentioned ISR, and I know the chair and I listen to every combatant commander that comes before us, and they always mention the need and the inadequacy of the existing ISR that they have. What is your current and steady state surge capacity with the MQ-9 combat lines, and is that sufficient?
Ranking Member Calvert, thank you for your appreciation of what we bring in our special missions from the Air Force Reserve. And to talk about what we are doing in particular with ISR and the MQ-9 mission, right now we are purely in associations where we supply manpower to the active component missions. We have the surge capacity both in special operations down at Herbrook Field and also what we're doing out at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada with missions across the spectrum. We are currently manned to do everything that we need to do to be able to produce currently 4 combat lines out of Nellis, out of Creech. And so that is, we have the manpower there, and we're doing really well with it. So, but we are folding in on what the active component is in that association.
Well, I know that at March Air Force Base, I have been told that there have been delays at the operations center there. Do you have the pilots you need, or do you need any contracted support, or do you think you have adequate?
So at March Air Reserve Base, it is actually the Air National Guard MQ-9s that are stationed there. So that is, we are the support unit for that organization.
Right, but you coordinate with them.
Yes, sir, we do. And so right now I'm unaware of any limitations that are occurring at March. And what we'll do is we will take for the record, and I'll get my staff to look at what support is needed, and if we are not providing, what will get them the lines that they need to be able to accomplish.
Okay, I look forward to hearing from you on that. On the cyber issue, I'm going to come back to that. Obviously, that's one of our biggest challenges, and I just recently co-sponsored a bill, as you may know, to establish a civilian cybersecurity reserve program to provide the Department of Defense with cybersecurity trained civilian personnel to ensure the U.S. government has the talent needed to address cyber. Obviously, I know that's a challenge to get people who are trained in that because there's so many opportunities in the private sector, and obviously it pays well. So we have to be extra vigilant to try to find young people who want to serve this country. So I guess this is for everybody, generals, admiral. The demand for cybersecurity professional, I know, well outpaces the current inventory. Could you share with the subcommittee some of the initiatives that you are pursuing to recruit some of the most talented individuals with, obviously, with the skill sets you're going to need in the future?
So this is General Daniels, and I can start if that's okay.
Sure.
Which is, we have 2 initiatives. One is to look at direct commissioning. So individuals can come in at higher grades and have to go through lesser ranks to get commensurate with where they're already performing on the civilian side. And then another initiative that we're taking is looking at credentialing and giving credit for those things that they already do on the civilian side, so they don't have to redo that to be a part of the military force. So we're using those to leverage existing talents rather than having to rebuild them. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And this is General Bell, and I can answer. We're taking a little bit of a different model. So what we have, our access is to 100,000 young people who have already screened and become Marines. They've already earned the title. They have usually demonstrate an exceptional growth in aptitude, personal discipline, and personal development while they're with us. So we look at those 100,000 souls, and we see potential. And we're looking at a program that will help us build. I think it was another member of the panel had asked a question about how do you diversify that group of cyber professionals. Well, we take a warrior first, and then if they have the aptitude over an arc of 10 to 20 years, we can build the skills to fight in that particular domain. Candidly, it's much easier for us to make a cyber professional than it is to make a bona fide Marine. So we're taking young people that have demonstrated the aptitude to be Marines first, enabling a greater opportunity to diversify our warrior population and build that capability over a period of decades instead of a 3 or 4 year hitch, and then they're out to the next contractor. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Admiral, anything?
Similar to Lieutenant General Daniels, and frankly with Lieutenant General Bellin, we're pursuing a number of traditional and non-traditional approaches to tap into this absolutely critically important talent pool. Another way that we are trying to tap into the investments that we've made as a service is through the creation of a full-time support community, wherein active duty sailors can transition to reserve support, but maintain their credentials and provide that benefit directly to the cyber forces. So we work closely with our recruiting command, but also within our own service to tap into that talent.
Yeah, good, thank you. Another subject, and a comment, I'll be talking to the chair about this. Obviously, modernization. For a number of years, the subcommittee has made efforts to ensure that the reserve components are not forgotten as we work to modernize our military forces. And I know that that all of you want to be in par with the active force, and so please let us know in advance what your needs are, before we can stay up with that as we go through this budget process. One last thing is, we've had a lot of challenges this year. Obviously, the biggest is COVID, and not to mention with the Guards' commitment to security at the Capitol and what's going on with the border and et cetera, et cetera. And we don't want to be taking that out of your budget for this year. And so I don't know, Chair, if we're going to be, what the mechanism is going to be with this. But obviously, we're not going to be doing an appropriation bill, I suspect, anytime soon. So I hope there's some plan maybe to do a supplemental of some sort to pay back these extraordinary costs that are going into these various functions that weren't planned for in the beginning.
Great point. And that's one of the cleanup things I'm going to be asking for at the end, Mr. Calvert, is with their status on COVID, as I did with the National Guard, and you and I have both been doing with the active duty. So thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Kirkpatrick and then Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. My question is for General Scobie. I was happy to hear that the Air Force Reserve is standing up a new reserve wing at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. I know Davis-Monthan, and its 1,300 reserve airmen are glad to have the administrative support on the base, and we look forward to welcoming the new organization. Focusing on your efforts to maintain and improve your fleet, our subcommittee's fiscal year 2021 bill restored funds for the A-10 and the KC-135 for the Air Force Reserve. After they were scheduled for divestiture by the Air Force, you discussed the need to synchronize both modernization efforts and divestment with the active duty component. Can you advise the committee on the impact of these funds and what future plans the Air Force has advised for transitioning to other airframes?
Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, thank you for your question, because it is so vital to us that we do set up an organization that will make sure that our airmen and their families are cared for. So the Davis-Monthan is very important to us. The second part of your question, which has to do with the A-10s and with the KC-135, right now we have the funding, and across our Air Force, it is about the balance between what are some of the legacy systems that we have to ensure that we have the capability and capacity to fight the wars the American people want, and then also what is our ability to modernize and bring in new systems that are going to be able to take us to the really high-end fights that we need to be able to be capable of doing. The funds that we have for the A-10 and the KC-135 are critical to ensure that as we transition this, which will be in the 2030 timeframe based on what the Air Force's plan is currently, is that we'll need to make sure that the wings that haven't been upgraded are continue to be upgraded. And then the weapon systems on the A-10 in particular will continue to evolve and do everything they need to be able to do. On the KC-135, our oldest tanker, that is the same thing. And really what it comes to with real-time information in the cockpit, so that the situational awareness of our tanker crews is increased dramatically. And that's the thing that we are modernizing within our tanker fleet. Make no mistake, we will have to keep these weapon systems on point until the replacements come. Right now, there is robust planning for both strategically with our tankers to transition from older KC-135s and KC-10s into the KC-46, but it'll be a combination of 135s and KC-10s in order to take us forward. And the same thing as we move from older weapon systems to newer ones, the Air Force is keeping the reserve in lockstep of what we are doing to go forward to improve and replace the older equipment with new equipment.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for your answer. This is really important to me and important to my district, of course. And so we are tracking this, just so you know. And if there's anything we can do to help you, please let me know. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mr. Cole, then Mr. Aguilar, then Mr. Diaz-Balart, and it appears that Mr. Ryan has joined us again. So, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This question is really to all of our witnesses. As the members of this committee know, I also sit on the Labor H Subcommittee of Appropriations, and it's been amazing to me as we've dealt with everything from teachers to researchers to you name it. Everybody's been under enormous stress because of COVID over this last year. And what we've seen in profession after profession is an increase of depression, mental illness, an increase of drug addiction, alcoholism, all kinds of problems. I'm just curious if we've seen this same sort of challenge to the respective reserve forces that you deal with. And if we have, what are the measures that you're taking to try and help those people in your force that are, again, have fallen victim to what's really been a very difficult disease for us to deal with, or virus, excuse me, for us to deal with in this country? I can start with any of them, Madam Chair. So if someone wants to take a crack at it, I'd be very interested in any response.
That's a fabulous question. Please, all of you, answer in whatever order you wish.
Hey, so this is General Bell, and I'll start. For us, we have a disproportionately young force. What we realized at the end of last spring was that the continued isolation that our young Marines and sailors were dealing with as a result of COVID and the lack of training, that aggregate of risk was greater to us than actually the return to training. By that, I mean, we have professional responsibilities to generate specific combat power for the nation in time of crisis. But also, if you put yourself in the boots of those young Marines and sailors, they thrive on the community that they have elected to join. And so we began to return to in-person drills and full training as early as last May. And what we have found is the units that have been the most aggressive with that and the most engaged, kneecap to kneecap, intimate leadership have done the best in regards to mental resiliency and morale, which I guess is no surprise, right? And so we have really done the best we can to collect information as the environment's evolved around us and to empower our subordinate leaders. And for those units, the young warriors are thriving. Hope that answers your question, sir.
I'll build on this too to say, not surprisingly, that like the rest of society, the Navy Reserve has dealt with the impact of COVID and what that means for travel and engagement and interaction and connectedness. That said, the Navy has a number of programs that are built specifically to address our mental resiliency. So our Sailor Assistance and Intercept for Life, we call it SAIL, is one, but even within the Reserve Force, our team within a team here, we developed a psychological health outreach program we call PHOP that is unique to the Reserve Force to reach out and have one-on-one interactions to ensure that our sailors are getting support and access to the services they need if they have questions or note behavior that differs from the norm, either in themselves or in others. So we're really trying to demystify the notion of reaching out for help and that outreach. And I think that what I can tell you is our sailors are very resilient. Over.
Terrific. Thank you, Admiral.
So from the Army side, the Army Reserve, we did see a slight increase in suicides last year. We're not seeing that same trend this year. We're back to the prior year values. We did find that because we converted so quickly to an online platform, which then allowed junior leaders that outreach to their squad and team members, that we actually recovered 6,000 of our non-participants by having that good leader-soldier interaction with them. So, of course, we want to get back to in-person as soon as possible, but this gave us another person-to-person contact point that we'd been lacking before. The other thing that we did was we put out a policy that allowed the buddy to be able to go on a set of orders to get paid if they saw their friend in crisis. So they could go into a duty status to get them to the help they needed as that good Samaritan assistance. So we gave the leaders that tool to say, yep, your soldier's helping another one. Let's go ahead and make it financially viable as well and for their time. And so we've done, and we're also looking at resilience, like the others. What else can we do? What more can we enable? So that's what we're up to.
Wow. And I guess, General,
from the Air Force side, as you would imagine and you would want, the four of us actually meet on a regular basis, and this is one of the things that we talked about in our last meeting. So I would say, from my perspective, I'm in lockstep with the rest of my rest of my witnesses here. And in the Air Force Reserve, what we've really focused on is the resiliency piece and how we stay connected with our airmen. As you can imagine, a predominantly part-time force, 75% of us being part-time, the rest of the job market that is out there and the strain that is put on the airmen has actually compounded some of our problems. So what we've done along with our command chief is focused on the resiliency piece, and we put together a resiliency package. We put 45 full-time first sergeants, one in each one of our wings, and that was in order to ensure that the airmen always had a place to be connected to, so they never felt like they were by themselves. The other thing that we did was add 10 full-time chaplains to our formation, and that really gets after a lot of the counseling and things that help our airmen cope with some of the problems they're having, and then we capture that so that we can give wing commanders feedback on what their formations may be suffering from so they can be more proactive. And that's what we've done in the Air Force.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the extra time, Madam Chair. Yield back.
No, fabulous question. Mr. Aguilar, and then Mr. Diaz-Balart, followed by Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Ms. Capter's question related to cyber. Reservists are critical members of our military who supply the DoD with valuable and reliable technical expertise, including those who work in this field of cybersecurity. I've consistently advocated for provisions that will diversify DoD's cyber professionals and service members. So I'll ask the entire panel, and if we could start with Lieutenant General Daniels, what efforts are conducted to recruit those of diverse backgrounds to fulfill these cyber missions?
So thank you, Congressman. We go out to a number of different universities to make sure that we're getting across the population We're looking at ROTC and other special scholarships similar to ROTC scholarships out at some of these habitually underrepresented populations to see if we can start in the ROTC pipeline, then to bring them into the reserve component afterwards.
Vice Admiral?
Well, similarly, our liaison with our recruiting command leads us to find new and creative ways to tap into this vein of expertise. So in some cases, the direct commission opportunities are exposing us to folks who, without any military experience, that we can bring in at relatively senior levels so that they don't have to start as an E1 or O1. So that's number one. Secondly, we certainly are trying to create the incentive packages that would drive those with the expertise in the civilian sector into a career in uniform. But then, as I mentioned before, thirdly, the most beneficial way for us is to access active duty sailors who are transitioning into the reserve force. So we make an appealing and attractive offer to them as well.
Appreciate that. Lieutenant General Scobie, or?
Thank you, Congressman. I would say that all of our cyber airmen, both enlisted and officer, are on our critical skills list. That makes them eligible for bonuses and reimbursement for travel. So we go out to schools and places that may be harder to get to, and we can recruit because we can bring them to where we need to in order for them to serve their nation. The other thing is in the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, we were authorized to participate in being able to give our airmen constructive credit for what they've already done on their civilian side. So both we can do that in a combination of education and experience that qualifies them to commission into a rank up to 06, which was just discussed. And that's what we're doing in the Air Force.
Yeah, I think that's critical. The direct commissioning is obviously a tool that I think can be enhanced and can help you. And obviously nothing is better than getting folks in this field over to minority serving institutions and to let those young people see what practitioners do and the career fields that you folks have. So to the extent that you can continue to do that, that would be great. I'm sorry, Lieutenant General.
Yeah, so the first thing we did in 2018 was build the reserve structure of cyber defense companies within the Marine Forces Reserve. And that gave us an opportunity to first lateral move into those structures, currently serving reservists who have the civilian expertise, and begin to migrate them over to the permissions that are unique permissions and security clearances are required to serve within the Department of Defense. It also gives us a chance to directly assess, as was already mentioned from the active component. From my personal perspective, to get to the heart of the question about it, is how do you provide this opportunity to a wider, more diverse population? And that goes to my comments earlier. We attract a lot of people into the Marine Corps that are trying to overcome the circumstances that they were born into. And what we discover is if they have the heart and the aptitude, they're exceptionally trainable. And so we look at it with a decades-long approach about how do we empower them with the training and the specific skill set that matches the character that they've already uncovered in service as a Marine. And so that combination, I'm quite certain by 2030, it is a pillar of our force design. And that's how we're approaching this, by looking at the talent that we already have and providing them opportunity as we harvest the expertise that already resides within the civilian professions of the service.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your answers to that question. Madam Chair, yield back.
Thank you. Another great workforce question. Mr. Diaz-Balart and then Mr. Ryan, if he's still available. Mr. Diaz-Balart, you disappeared. Or maybe pushed the wrong button, Mr. Calvert. Should I see if Mr. Ryan's available and then go back?
Sure, go ahead.
Mr. Ryan, if you're available. Is the staff checking with Mr. Diaz-Balart's office? Yeah. We're checking that right now. So while we're waiting, so I don't keep things going any farther, let me ask my general question. The combatant commanders and the active duty rely on the reserve components to provide technical support and capabilities. I mean, just everything: engineering, medical, signals, maneuver support, help with military police, military intelligence, civilian affairs capabilities. It's, and it's not only for here, but it's for abroad too. So it's a vast set of skills that you're looking for. In order to increase the overall reserves and strength, that means we need to be increasing the capacity to generate deployable soldiers, providing all these different enabling capabilities to the total force. So reserve units are primarily filled by traditional reservists, members of the selected reserve who are usually required to work 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. However, reserve units are also staffed by full-time civilian and or military employees. These employees, known as full-time support personnel, are assigned to organize, administer, instruct, recruit, train, maintain supplies, equipment, and aircraft, perform other functions as required on a daily basis, in the execution of operational missions and readiness preparations. So to all of you, what is your outlook for the overall end strength numbers this year and next, and how will your troops be utilized? Could you describe the importance of having the full-time support as part of your mission? And do you have the adequate level of full-time support you need in order to be ready to fulfill a mission assigned to you? And who would ever like to start first? I'd like to hear from all four of you.
I'll start then, ma'am. Thank you for the great question. So the Navy Reserve has 10,000 full-time support sailors. We currently are going through what I refer to as a rebalance to determine where they're assigned and how they're being used. Given the definition that you described was my initial filter on that's why we have them, what are they doing? So in some cases, I'm beginning to maneuver where those full-time support sailors are detailed in order to get after the reserve capabilities and depth that I described earlier, a la distributed mobilization and activation. Critically important for me to use those FTS sailors to enable that function. And that's why I'm distributing them now to large Navy operations centers and regions and our operational units to enable that. So that's number one. Back to your question about do we have adequate numbers? There's a standard POM rigor, the annual budget rigor that looks at requirements related to active duty and reserve force. And then we come up with what is the optimal way to solve against the requirement. So I would tell you that right now, our end strength is where we want it to be. However, I would offer that in 23 and beyond, there's a likelihood that we could see an increase as we divest legacy active end strength and then recapitalize those at a fraction of the dollar for the reserve force.
So this is General Daniels. I'll follow on if that's okay. So again, we're looking at what forces do we need for the future fight? What sort of capabilities will we need in 2028 and 2035? How will that mesh with the active duty resources and capabilities? What percentage should be in the reserve versus active, as the others have mentioned? Our end strength is looking fairly good. We're probably a little light, and we're taking some aggressive measures through the rest of this year to get us at full strength. Like the others, we would probably appreciate additional full-time personnel that help with that readiness, help with that myriad of activities that you mentioned, particularly as we get into more and more technical fights in the future. We're at about 13-14% full-time support, and a proportion of that is our military technicians. So we continue to look at our resources, make sure we're placing them, like the Navy, in all the right places to have the maximum effectiveness and efficiency.
Air Force and Marines want to add anything?
Chair McCollum, it's General Scobie from the Air Force, and very similar to my counterparts, we're in the same way. Our end strength is looking very good this year. Our recruiting and retention efforts have been going really well. Our loss rate for our component is about 10%, and normally, historically, it runs about 11%. So we've seen a boost, basically from what has been going on with COVID. Our full-time support is based on two things, and you articulated it correctly. It's requirements based on our mission that we're going to do, and our care for our airmen, and to make sure that we do that. In general, as we go through the programming cycle, we will need some more full-time support, but what we're trying to do is balance that full-time support with what we have in our part-time force, because that is the savings. You know, we are the best value approach to defense. We are so much less expensive than a full standing force because of those part-time people that we have, that we need to take a very measured approach to be able to give the American people the greatest combat capability we can at the least burden to our taxpayers. And so we will be, we study that on a regular basis and do manpower studies to see what that full-time support is needed. But I can tell you, for the, because of what has been going on, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, we definitely could use some more full-time support in order to make sure that we are getting after the administration that we need for our airmen. And that's all from the Air Force.
Thank you. Last but never least, the Marines.
Yeah, so our model is a little different, probably no surprise. We don't have full-time support. We actually rotate active duty Marines into the reserve component. That we refer to them as inspector instructors. And the idea there is that they bring in the most current tactics, techniques, and procedures that are learned as the Marines are operating globally back into the reserve component, and they teach and instruct. And they also provide the sustained care and feeding of any reserve unit. And that's true in every single unit of employment we have. That model has worked well for us for decades, and it still continues to work well. I think to get some of your questions, as we acknowledge that we're moving deeper and deeper into the information era, you know, how will we structure our units to maybe more efficiently blend active and reserve for sustained operations? And I think that in this particular domain, you know, in the information era, whether it's space or cyber, there are things that are required globally 24/7, like TED, ISR, and other things that our 4th Marine Air Wing has operated for years with a significant percentage of active duty structure within the reserve structure. And that gives us a responsiveness and a capability that is unique and very cost effective. I think my hunch is professionally that those same models will apply in space and cyber in the years to come, and we're already looking at some of the designs to do that.
Well, thank you. And as the Marine Corps rolls out its 2030, that'll also be part of a discussion, I think, too, about the reserves. So Mr. Diaz-Balart, my understanding, Mr. Calvert, is having computer issues. So I'm going to go to Mr. Ryan, and if Mr. Diaz-Balart comes back, we will definitely include anything he might want to add himself, or we'll submit it for the record. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Cue the dogs up. Just they haven't barked all afternoon until I turned off my mute. Thank you. This has been a great hearing. General Scobie, I appreciate you being so attentive to us in Ohio. I wanted to ask you how important it is that we have continued improvements, including the widening of an assault strip and the construction of an unpaved assault runway. These improvements to occur at the Youngstown Air Reserve Station, and are these improvements necessary to ensure that the station is able to execute the aerial spray mission, the only such unit in the military capable of performing what we believe is a critical mission for us?
Thank you, Congressman Ryan. You know, a very interesting mission. Aerial spray has been critical to the things we've done, especially after hurricane relief. But in particular, widening the runway and the assault strip that we are putting in at Youngstown Air Reserve Station are critically important for 2 reasons. One is the mission that Youngstown does with tactical airlift outside of aerial spray as well is critically important. And not only that, but it is a regional center of excellence for being able to do those things. And it's not just the C-130, it's also our C-17 assets as well. So this widening the assault strip and adding the assault strip are going to be 2 major things that we're going to improve in order to bring better readiness and better capability to across the Air Force, not just the Air Force Reserve.
Great, I appreciate that. We talked, you know, when you were in town, a lot about mental health and mental health promotion. Can you talk a little bit about some of the efforts General Hokanson talked a little bit about the efforts that he's implementing that are specific to the National Guard. What specific efforts have you engaged in the Air Force Reserve to address this critical issue?
Congressman Ryan, we're taking a holistic look at how it's the comprehensive airman fitness. And this is a critical piece of what that entails, because it is not just what has occurred with our airmen since they've been part of our formation, since they entered the Air Force. It's also what's happened to them throughout their lives. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we're bringing all these things into looking at what we can do for our airmen. We just hired an additional 10 therapists that will help us get after that resiliency piece. And they are full-time people that sit in our organizations in order to help assess our airmen when they're having difficulty. I would say we're in lockstep with where the Air Force is going, but as you also saw, the Guard has been very instrumental in this as well. So all of us are working together in order to make sure that we're bringing in the right people, the right resources, and looking at our airmen, not just while we have them, but it's everything. While they're in their civilian employment, what they did as children growing up, and all those things that make them who they are.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we're having lots of discussions across the military now. And you mentioned just growing up, you know, the research behind adverse childhood experiences and that effect on kids long term, and really being a predictor of addiction or post-traumatic stress or other kinds of sicknesses. We could almost find out who's more susceptible if we take a little bit of time on the front end to understand what maybe they've gone through as kids. So I'm working to try to get a comprehensive assessment done as people come into the military to really try to understand. And that can help with placement too. There'll maybe be certain people you don't want to place into combat, but can serve the country and the military in another substantial way. So anyway, I'm glad you're talking about it, and I appreciate your leadership. You know, I love you and everything you're doing. So just keep it going and let us know how we can continue to help you, and just keep up the great work.
Thank you, Congressman.
Well, thank you. So, Mr. Calvert, it does not appear that Mr. Diaz-Balart will be able to join us back again, but I just want to point out he's one of the early birds, always on right away when these start. So I'm extremely disappointed for him that we don't have his question, but we will get it to the committee members. So some follow-up. We're going to follow up as we did with the first panel on COVID, workforce development with cyber, and also with being able to retain pilots. Healthcare, we're going to be having a hearing on healthcare, and you'll be able to maybe help our committee as we prepare for that hearing. And then extremism, as it's come up, what is the definition of that? What does it mean? And we need to have uniformity as to what that means in the reserve, in the Guard, and in our active duty. So it's very important that we get that right. We get that right the first time. So I want to thank everybody. Everybody had some technical difficulties this time, from, you know, tires to video not working to computers. I won't say blowing up, but not cooperating at the end. So I thank the panelists, and I thank all the committee members for their patience during that. To the four of you who testified today, thank you also very much for your service. Thank you for the support of your families while you go through serving our country. We know that it is a family effort. It's a team effort to make it an American effort to protect our national security. And so with that, I am going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you again. The meeting is adjourned.